Thanks for joining us today for our webinar. We're excited to have you with us. My name's Amy Perkins, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at Brooks Publishing for Early Childhood Assessment Tools. This webinar is on the Parenting Interactions with Children Checklist of Observations Linked to Outcomes form, or the PICCOLO. And this tool observes a wide range of parenting behaviors that help children develop over time. And we're happy to have PICCOLO co-developer Lori Roggman here with us today to share a presentation about the tool. But before we get to the presentation, I want to go over some housekeeping tasks. So you'll be muted for the webinar, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box on your GoToWebinar panel, or you can tweet them using hashtag #TalkAboutTools. We'll take these questions after the presentation during our Q&A portion. For best audio and screen quality, you may want to exit any unneeded programs. And also for the presentation, you may want to minimize the GoToWebinar bar on your monitor so you can see more of your screen. You can do that by clicking the orange button with the arrow in the top corner of the control bar. And if you need to enlarge the bar again to ask a question, you can just click the orange button and the control panel will pop back out. Also, we're recording the webinar, and you'll receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email tomorrow. Feel free to share that link with your colleagues. We'll also be posting a link to the recording on the Brooks Publishing website. So as I said, we're happy to have Lori Roggman here with us. I'm happy to introduce her. Dr. Roggman's research focuses on parenting and children's early development. She has extensive experience in home visiting research, integrating theory-based inquiry with program evaluation and application to policy and practice. She's a strong methodologist with expertise in observational data collection and longitudinal analysis, and has offered several measures used extensively by researchers and practitioners. Dr. Roggman was the lead author of Developmental Parenting, a guide for early childhood practitioners, and the principal investigator of a local research team for the National Early Head Start Research and Evaluation Project. As a researcher, Dr. Roggman has developed multiple observational measures of parents' behaviors with infants and young children. But when practitioners who work with parents started asking about a measure that they could use to identify or assess positive parenting behaviors, she saw the need for a measure that would be easy to learn and use in real life outside of research. And PICCOLO was designed especially for this purpose, and it involved a team of people who are researchers who also work closely with programs for parents with infants or young children. The result was a practical measure that is also psychometrically strong, and we're happy to have Dr. Roggman here with us today to tell us about the PICCOLO. So Lori, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. And welcome to everyone who has attended this webinar and is ready to hear about our measure of developmental parenting. This is me. I'm Lori Roggman, Professor of Human Development at Utah State University, and I was the lead developer of the PICCOLO measure of parenting, but many other people were involved, and I'll mention some of them as we go. Today I'm going to talk about two questions. One is, what is PICCOLO? So I'll spend some time just describing the measure so that hopefully many of your questions will be answered just from those descriptions. But then I'll also talk a little bit about how PICCOLO can be used with families. First, just to show you what PICCOLO is, this is what it is, this is what it looks like. PICCOLO itself stands for PICCOLO Interactions with Children, Checklist of Observations Linked to Outcomes, which is a descriptive title of exactly what it is, but it's a long title, so that's why we call it PICCOLO. It has 4 domains, and that's why there are 4 pages of the measure, one for each of the domains. It's an observational measure of parenting interactions with children age 1 to 3, and we've tested PICCOLO now with a little bit wider age range than that. We developed PICCOLO at Utah State University. I was the lead developer, and I worked with Gina Cook, Mark Innocenti, Vonda Jump Norman, and Katie Christiansen, who all worked very hard together on this measure to develop it and finish it up and write a user's guide, and also now publishing papers on the measure. PICCOLO is a measure of developmental parenting in 4 domains, and developmental parenting is a specific aspect of parenting that supports children's development. And we began developing PICCOLO by reviewing the research literature and identifying parenting behaviors that had been measured in some way or another, usually observationally, that were in some way associated closely with children's early developmental outcomes. And we identified behaviors in each of these 4 domains: in affection or warmth, in responsiveness or sensitivity, in encouragement, or encouragement might also be thought of as scaffolding or supporting autonomy, and then in teaching, sometimes referred to as cognitive stimulation. The definition of developmental parenting is parenting that helps children develop, and we also think about it in a couple of other ways. One is that it's parenting that develops over time, that parents aren't born knowing what to do with their children, but that those behaviors develop in the context of their interactions with their babies as they're growing. And that it's also parenting that parents sometimes need help to develop, and that programs that work directly with parents, including programs like Early Head Start, but similar other kinds of programs, that the PICCOLO scores from our measure are sensitive to intervention, and those that were in Early Head Start had higher scores. Developmental parenting behaviors have been shown to support 3 areas of child development. The social area of child development that includes attachment security, multiple aspects of self-regulation, early relationships with parents and with other people. And it also supports cognitive development, children's early exploration, curiosity, their reasoning, problem solving, and of course later their school success, especially in science and math. And the language development area of communication, vocabulary, and early literacy that is also very fundamental to school readiness and school success. We developed PICCOLO for practical use for practitioners in programs that work directly with parents. So PICCOLO was designed to identify parenting behaviors that support early child development so that people working with parents would be able to identify those behaviors. PICCOLO shows what parents are comfortable doing and think is important to do, so that makes it an appropriate entry point for intervention. And PICCOLO can help early childhood practitioners provide encouraging feedback about positive parenting, so they can let parents know what's working for them in supporting their children's development. When we were developing PICCOLO, we worked closely with 3 partner programs in our area that worked with parents of infants and toddlers. 2 of them were Early Head Start programs, and then we worked with a 3rd program as well. And we got a lot of feedback along the way from practitioners about how PICCOLO was working for them. And these were some of the things, just a couple of the things that they said. One was that it just helped them be a better observer to use the measure, that it highlighted parents' skills, that it was easy to learn compared to other measures that they tried to learn that would help them look at parenting, and that they saw things they hadn't seen before, that it helped them identify parents' strengths that they hadn't noticed. We designed PICCOLO to be brief. It requires only a 10-minute observation, and it's specific. There are 29 behavior descriptions. These aren't the only 29 things parents do to support their children's development, but they are 29 things that are observable and that we were able to link to measures of children's outcomes in our data. The measure is practical. It helps guide program planning. But it's also reliable and valid. Observers usually agree, and it predicts good child outcomes, and its psychometric strengths make it appropriate for research as well as for practical use in programs for parents. The way that we developed PICCOLO was by using data and video from the Early Head Start Research and Evaluation Project. That project followed 3,000 families from the time they applied for Early Head Start until, well, basically we're still trying to follow them, but they were involved in data collection when their children were ages 1, 2, and 3 primarily, and then there were follow-up studies just before kindergarten and in 5th grade. So we were able to access data and video recorded observations from the archive from that project. Then we conducted new observations of over 4,500 video recordings from over 2,000 families in 16 communities across the United States. And from all of those data, we selected the 29 best items from over 100 items that we originally began testing. We had identified even more items from the research literature, but some of them were redundant or were vague and abstract and would have been hard to observe. So we had reduced it to 100 items and tested those. But now we have the 25 best ones that are in the PICCOLO measure. We wanted to take cultural variations into consideration. A lot of measures that had been developed to observe parenting had been developed on primarily middle-class American families of European descent. And the early Head Start sample had good representation of European Americans, but also African Americans and Latino Americans. Our PICCOLO observers were also from multiple ethnicities, and we originally matched the observer to the ethnicity of the family in the video recording that they were observing. But then later we had everyone switch so that we could test the reliability of observers across ethnicity. And we found that observers were reliable with each other across ethnicity, and that PICCOLO was reliable and valid within each of those groups. Now, these 3 groups are still limited in terms of the wide variety of families that programs may be serving, but just by testing it within each of these groups, we felt like we were showing that we weren't restricting it just to one major group. PICCOLO is reliable. Independent observers rate PICCOLO items similarly. PICCOLO scores are correlated also with similar measures, which shows construct validity. So they're correlated with another measure of parenting from the same observations. And PICCOLO scores also predict children's development, so that's predictive validity, that they are predicting what they're supposed to predict. These are the child outcomes that were predicted by PICCOLO in each of the 3 domains that I mentioned before, and these are measures that were used in the Early Head Start Research and Evaluation Project and were available to us at ages 3 and 5. So at age 3 in the social emotional domain, we used the Bailey Behavior Rating of Emotion Regulation as the developmental outcome in that domain. And then at both ages 3 and 5, we looked at the Child Behavior Checklist of Aggression. In the cognitive domain, we used the Bailey Mental Development Index at age 3 and the Woodcock-Johnson Problem-Solving Subscale at age 5. For language development, we looked at the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test at ages 3 and 5 and the Woodcock-Johnson Letter Word Subscale at age 5. All of these measures are referenced in our user's guide, and all of them are commonly used in early childhood research and have their own established psychometric qualities. Each of the PICCOLO domains has 7 or 8 behavior items. The first 3 domains, affection, responsiveness, and encouragement, each have 7 items, and then the 4th domain, teaching, has 8 items. These are the first 2 items on the affection scale: speaks in a warm tone of voice, smiles at child. So these are pretty straightforward behaviors that are fairly easy to observe, and they're scored on a 0, 1, 2 scale. 0 is absent. The behavior wasn't observed at all. 1 is barely. There was brief or minor or emerging behavior, and 2 is clearly. There was definite, strong, or frequent behavior. We began developing PICCOLO thinking it would be a checklist of either the behavior happened or it didn't, but practitioners really encouraged us to include an in-between score because they wanted to be able to identify behaviors that parents we're either beginning to do or we're doing a little bit, but could be encouraged to do more. Each PICCOLO item has observation guidelines. So for example, speaks in a warm tone of voice. There's a description of what that means. The parent's voice is positive in tone and may show enthusiasm or tenderness. A parent who speaks little but very warmly should be coded highly. So it's more about the quality of the tone of voice than the amount of speaking. Smiles at child, the observation guidelines are that the parent directs smiles toward the child, but that the parent and child do not need to be looking at each other when the smile occurs, and it includes small smiles. The reason we say they don't need to be looking at each other when the smile occurs is that it's hard to observe whether the baby saw the mom smile, but if the mom is, or the dad, or someone else is smiling at a child frequently, then the child is going to see some of those smiles. Each of the PICCOLO items also has additional observation notes that provide even more detail about scoring the PICCOLO, and additional observation notes for all of the items are in the PICCOLO User's Guide, and some of them are quite extensive. We've developed these notes as we've worked with more and more observers who are, particularly those observers who are working on research projects. Scoring PICCOLO is simple. It's just summing the item scores to get a domain score and summing the domain scores to get a total PICCOLO score. Basically, the higher item scores and the higher domain scores are strengths of that parent. And we do provide averages, what the average scores were at each age, and those are in the user's guide. But we recommend that practitioners in particular emphasize what it is that parents are doing and focus on those strengths. I'm going to just that I've mentioned is affection, and the definition of affection is warmth, physical closeness, and positive expressions toward the child. We tested a lot of items in this domain, and here are 3 of the items in our final measure. The first 2 I've already talked about a little bit, and the third one is praising the child, saying something positive about child characteristics or about what the child is doing. And a thank you can be coded as praise if that's how it was used. And then, of course, our observational notes will include a few other examples of ways that parents might praise a very young child. The second domain is responsiveness. Its definition is responding to the child's cues, emotions, words, interests, and behaviors. Responsiveness is closely related to sensitivity, which is a key part of parenting that fosters early attachment, and particularly responses to emotions. But we also include in our responsiveness domain when parents respond to the child's vocalizations or what they seem to be trying to say, what they're interested in, and what they're doing, because that's an important part of supporting the child's development overall in multiple domains. Here are the first 3 items from the responsiveness scale, and the first item is just paying attention to what the child is doing. The parent looks at and reacts to what the child is doing by making comments, showing interest, helping, or otherwise attending to the child's actions. And the purpose of that particular behavior is that if parents aren't paying close attention to what the child is doing, they won't be able to respond to it. So we just want to see that the parent is paying close attention in some way or other. The next 2 items are about being sort of adapting to the child, so changing pace or activity to meet the child's interests or needs. The observation guidelines say that the parent tries a new activity or speeds up or slows down an activity in response to where the child looks, what the child reaches for, what the child says, or the emotions the child shows. And This is in response to something the child is doing, but it's the parent who's changing the activity or changing the pace. We often see this when children are getting restless during play, particularly if the parent is reading a book or something to them. The parent then may speed up to keep the child's interest or slightly alter how they're doing the activity to keep the child engaged. The third item, the parent is flexible about the child's change of activities. The parent accepts the child's choice of a new activity or toy or shows agreeableness about the change or about the child playing in unusual ways with or without toys. And that's in response to the child initiating a change, doing something a little bit differently, changing what they're doing, and the parent goes along with it. Our third domain is encouragement, and the definition of encouragement is active support of children's exploration, effort, skills, initiative, curiosity, creativity, and play. That's a long list, but it's a lot of the specific things that encouragement supports, rather than generally talking about autonomy, which is sort of part of this by supporting children's initiative in particular. But these are all part of the encouragement domain. These are the first three items in the encouragement domain. Waits for child's response after making a suggestion. So a parent may say something the child could do, but then they pause and wait for the child to answer or to do something, whether the child actually responds or not. So the parent just doesn't suggest something and then do it, like do it for the child or get the child going on doing something. They really pause, and sometimes you see them sort of sit back a little bit and wait for the child's response. The second item is that the parent encourages the child to handle toys, offers toys, says positive things when the child shows obvious interest in the toys, but we don't include preventing children from putting toys in their mouth because these are young children and they do that, and parents often stop them from putting them in their mouth, but otherwise encourage them to explore the toys in a variety of ways. The third item is supports child in making choices. And this is when the parent allows the child to choose an activity or toy and then gets involved in the activity or toy that the child chooses. Our fourth domain is teaching. It's defined as shared conversation and play, cognitive stimulation, explanations, and questions. And these are the first three teaching items. One is explains reasons for something to the child. This is when the parent says something that could answer a why question, whether the child asks a question or not. So there's often some sort of causal structure in what the parent says about why something happens or why they should do something. The second item is suggests activities to extend what the child is doing. So the parent says something the child could do to add to what the child is already doing without interrupting the child's interests or actions or play. The third one is repeats or expands child's words or sounds. So this is sort of similar in that, again, it's an expansion on what the child is saying. So the parent says the same words or makes the same sounds the child makes or repeats what the child says while adding something that adds to the idea. And then a fourth example, and I used 4 examples for this domain because it's the domain that's a little bit longer and has 8 items altogether, is labeling objects or actions for the child. The parent names what the child is doing, playing with, or looking at. Our second question today is how can Piccolo be used with families? We designed Piccolo to be based on a relatively short observation, 10 minutes. Piccolo can be scored during that observation, live. But we recommend video recording if it's possible, because then it's possible to observe and score Piccolo later and also watch the video with the parent and be able to talk about their strengths together. And then it also makes it possible to look at the video with a supervisor or with other practitioners to get help identifying a parent's strengths or get ideas for planning activities to do with that parent, perhaps on a home visit or as part of a parenting group. We encourage practitioners when they use PICCOLO with parents to be positive. All of the items on the PICCOLO measure are positive behaviors. There are no negative behaviors. We want practitioners to use this measure to emphasize what parents are doing well and often, and to take a practical approach to identifying additional opportunities for parents to do those behaviors by asking parents when they can do more of these behaviors as part of their regular activities. And we also encourage practitioners to be culturally sensitive by asking parents what kinds of parenting interactions are important to them and building from there. What does PICCOLO tell you about parenting? What PICCOLO shows is what a parent can do to support a child's development, which is why it's particularly important to identify these behaviors as a starting point for promoting parenting that supports child development. It also shows you what a parent believes is important to do, what a parent is comfortable doing, and what a parent knows how to do with their child. So it provides practitioners with a lot of information that can guide their planning for their home visits and for their other kinds of interventions. So thank you. We are, of course, very grateful to the parents and children in all those thousands of observations that we use to develop PICCOLO, and to the Early Head Start Research Consortium and the Head Start Bureau for making those video recorded observations available for researchers. PICCOLO development was supported by an Administration for Children, Youth, and Families grant and a Utah State University grant as well. Some of the additional PICCOLO team members were James Akers, Cora Price, Laura Michelle Gardner, Sheila Anderson, Krista Gurko, and Nicole Todd, and a very large group of undergraduate observers who volunteered for this project and observed a lot of video recordings. Our program partners were Bear River Head Start in Logan, Utah, Davis Early Head Start in Layton, Utah, the Guadalupe Schools Early Childhood Program in Salt Lake City, Utah, and practitioners in those programs provided us with a lot of feedback and guidance we really appreciated. I've mentioned the PICCOLO Users Guide that you can see at the top. There will also be a training DVD available that provides examples of observations of parents and young children that can be used to practice and learn PICCOLO. And then finally, our book on developmental parenting that has a lot of information about how to use observations of parenting while working with parents of young children. And you can get a discount that Amy will tell you.
Great. Thanks, Lori, for telling us all about the PICCOLO. I should let everyone know that this tool, the user's guide and the DVD, will be out in August. So the PICCOLO has been used for several years in research, and as the authors were developing it and testing it, but it's going to be out in its published form in August. So you can use the code that's on your screen, and you can pre-order it and get a 20% discount, and then it would get shipped to you when it publishes in August. So I think now we're going to take some questions. So if you have any questions, submit them in the box on your GoToWebinar screen, and we'll cover them. So Lori, I do have a few questions to show to you. Let's see. So how do you recommend sharing results with families?
Oh, my goodness, if my screen is
I think your screen is.
I'm just trying to open my
Sorry.
open this panel, but that didn't work very well. Sorry. Well, there's a lot of information that we have about using PICCOLO with families, and I tried to provide a little bit of that in the slides, but we recommend that programs sort of let families know if they're going to use this measure that they're going to be observing parenting, but certainly any program that does home visiting or has goals about parenting should be measuring it in some way, and this is just one way that they can measure it. And we hope that it's easy enough that practitioners will be able to use that. But we recommend that families know ahead of time so that they're not surprised by an observation, that the observation be done where the family's comfortable, and that there be a variety of toys that can engage the child. So sometimes the video recordings that were used in the Early Head Start research and evaluation a project where it's called the 3-bag procedure, and there's 3 bags of toys that they use in sequence, but that's not really required for these observations. You can use toys that are familiar, that you might ask the parent to pick the child's new to get the child's interest if they're they might be difficult to engage at that moment. So that's what we recommend for doing the observation in the first place. And then what for giving parents feedback, we just really recommend emphasizing the behaviors that parents did well. So wherever their highest scores are, that's where the emphasis is, because that's what parents can do and that's what they think is important. So that's the place to begin those conversations.
Great, thanks, Lori.
If there are more specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
We have a couple questions about the age range for the tool. So if you could, we have one of our listeners asked whether it could be used for Head Start home visiting programs, or is it just really for 0 to birth to 3?
Well, the data that we used to develop PICCOLO was collected as part of the project, and we had our own local project where we began data collection a little bit earlier. So most of the data that we used for developing PICCOLO went from 10 months, parents interacting with children as young as 10 months, and up to 47 months, so almost age 4. Then we had another set of observations, again, that we had access to locally that were from the spring just before kindergarten, and it looks like we can use PICCOLO reliably at that age as well. We just didn't have the data to really test that in more depth, but it does look like PICCOLO will work with older children.
Great.
We're now testing it with babies ages 4 months to 9 months, and it looks like it's going to work. That's all. I really can't say much more than that because we don't have much data, but we just started doing those observations, and it looks like it's going to work.
Great, thanks. How often do you recommend using the PICCOLO with the same family?
Well, we would always recommend sort of near the beginning of when you're working with them, and then, at least then at the end of the program year. Many of us would recommend using it, every 6 months, every 4 months, every 3 months. If it's integrated into the program's ongoing practice, and if observing parenting and giving feedback to parents, if parents is a key goal of a program, then it makes sense to do it more often and identify what parents are doing and be able to give them that feedback.
Good.
But it really is up to programs how often they do that.
Good. Thanks for clarifying that. We have a question that was submitted during the registration process about whether the tool could be used in pediatric clinics to assist in determining parents' needs and challenges.
Yeah, I think so. I saw that question, and I think that would be possible. I mean, I think the easiest thing to do would be to videotape a 10-minute play interaction. We have found that we can reliably observe from a 5-minute interaction, and sometimes with the younger babies, that's all you get of their sustained engagement and interaction, so it's appropriate to do a somewhat shorter observation. I also think someone who has practiced with the tool will be able to see those behaviors in more like in an informal setting, just observing the parent interacting with their child. Our observers who work on our project say they see people all the time. They go to the grocery store and they see people, that was a warm tone of voice.
Right.
That was a nice pause after a suggestion. So they do begin observing those more easily. But I think that would be
would work.
Practical use of the measure, yeah.
Okay, great. And we did have someone else also ask during the registration process about the home visits rating scale, the hovers, and whether the PICCOLO and the hovers could be used together. So I don't know if you want to kind of cover.
Yeah, we have another observational measure that's actually of home visiting practices that are occurring during the course of a home visit that we've been developing over the last 15 years or so. And most of the same people are involved in both measures. And what we envision is in a program that's providing individualized services to families, and particularly in a home visiting setting, these home visiting interactions, there are several characteristics that are important for quality. One is a positive relationship with the family, responding to the family's strengths, facilitating parent-child interaction, and establishing a collaborative partnership. And a lot of those aspects of home visiting also involve providing positive feedback to parents about their parenting. So PICCOLO actually helps improve the quality of home visiting by providing a tool that helps home visitors do those exact things that would be measured on the home visiting rating scales. But really those rating scales are about the quality of the home visit, and PICCOLO is about parenting.
Great, thanks for the explanation. We have a question about reporting data. So what's a good way to report data? Can one overall score be used?
We've used the overall score in research, and it's fine. I mean, it predicts outcomes. We just presented at the Society for Research in Child Development. We presented new analyses showing that PICCOLO in the first 3 years predicts reading and math in 5th grade. So we're seeing long-term outcomes from overall developmental parenting. But I really believe that when you're working with parents, you may want to see, like at a program level, you may want to see what parents are like in your community. Are they more likely to be doing a lot of teaching, or are they more likely to be showing a lot of affection? Are they very responsive? Do they show a lot of encouragement? So scores in those domains, I think, are more useful for identifying strengths in the community and also in seeing where is a program having its impact. Are we increasing teaching scores but not scores in other domains, or what kinds of changes are we seeing in families that are enrolled in the program? So I would encourage the use of the domain scores, although the total score, I think, is a pretty powerful piece of data in itself.
Great, thanks. We have a question about whether or not the tool's been used to support eligibility for Part C programs. This listener is specifically thinking about children and families who are coming from child protection and helping use the tool to support professional clinical opinion. Has it been used that way before, or what are your thoughts on if it could be used?
We really did not develop or test it in that way. So I would really, I guess I would hesitate to say anything that's high stakes in any way. We really have not tested it in that way. That said, there's an article that will be coming out in the Infant Mental Health Journal this year that is about using PICCOLO in an infant mental health setting to help identify parenting strengths as a starting point for how to support parenting when the relationship has been interrupted. And so I think it's very useful in those settings. I don't know about its use for decisions about either a child coming into Part C services or other kinds of decisions about eligibility.
Great, thanks. Yeah, one of our listeners responded it was great for program planning then. Use the tool.
Yeah.
So it's good to plan the program.
Right.
So I think, if anyone listening has any more questions, please go ahead and type them into the box now, because we are almost at the end of our time, and I think we've answered all of the questions so far. So we'll give you a couple more seconds to type any follow-up questions in.
I think someone asked about family child care too.
Oh, yes.
And I just wanted to mention that we also have a paper coming out in the Infant Mental Health Journal will have a special section on Piccolo, and there are actually 6 papers in that special section, one on Piccolo overall and one on Piccolo with fathers, because we've used it with fathers, one on Piccolo specifically with parents of children with disabilities, and another one on Piccolo with child care providers. So it's been used to observe provider interactions with children in a child care setting and shows good reliability and validity in that setting. So we're encouraged by its use there. There's also a paper, as I mentioned, on using it in an infant mental health program, and also a paper on validating Piccolo in Turkey. Piccolo has been translated into Turkish. It's also been translated into German and French, but the Spanish version of Piccolo is available in the Piccolo User's Guide, because a lot of Spanish-speaking families are served by home visiting programs in the U.S., and having a Spanish version may help practitioners talk about parenting with those families.
Yeah, that's great to mention, Lori. So the Spanish version is photocopyable on the back of the user's guide. So if you buy the user's guide, you can then just photocopy as many forms as you need for as many families as you work with. For the Infant Mental Health Journal that the issue that you were mentioning, we have someone asked when the papers will be published, and I believe it's the next issue. Is that right?
I believe it's the next issue, but it'll be coming out, I don't know, summer, late summer, we're not sure.
Okay, so we'll make sure here at Brooks to share that when the journal does come out. We'll be featuring the articles on Piccolo, so you can kind of keep an eye out for stuff from Brooks, because we'll make sure we'll let people know when that's available. And we did get another question in. So this is asking about the use of Piccolo in a program and whether it's been used to help a parent increase their score over time. So I guess and I think from what you were discussing that some programs have used it that way to help measure before and after.
Yeah, we have actually, when we provide training pretty regularly to programs, and we talk about some specific ways of helping parents increase the use of these behaviors. But we primarily encourage practitioners to start with what they're already doing, and I want to mention that in all of those 2,000 families, no one scored a 0. These are all low-income families. They all are facing a variety of challenges, and nobody scored 0. So there's always some place to start. And what we encourage practitioners to do is to identify what domain are they strongest in, and then talk about the behaviors in that domain. They're already doing some of them, and so other behaviors in that domain may be easy for them to sort of add in to their interactions with their children. And they may already do those other behaviors. You just didn't observe them in the 10 minutes that you observed. But we really encourage them to begin with that strong domain, and then after providing support for that domain and being able to give feedback there, then bridging from that domain to other domains. For example, perhaps if the parent is strong in the affection domain, to say, well, you really show your child a lot of positive emotion, you show them a lot that you care about them and love them. How can you use more words to tell them? Because then that helps in the teaching domain by providing maybe labels for characteristics of the child or things the child does. So then that increases behavior in another domain, but in a way that's related to the parent's strengths.
Great, thanks. We have another question about what are your thoughts on using Piccolo in an autism support program, and whether it should be kind of modified?
I don't know. I would encourage a lot of the behaviors that we've identified in Piccolo are, especially in the responsiveness and encouragement domain, are really linked to the child's behavior. So, regardless of where the child is developmentally, for example, then those behaviors are just in response to that child. Certainly I would suspect that someone doing intensive work with parents of young children who have been diagnosed with autism may have additional behaviors that they're trying to increase in frequency in parents, and they may want to also be observing those. But I don't think any of these behaviors would be irrelevant or negative in interactions be observed and that parents would benefit from feedback on.
Great. Thanks, Lori. These were some good questions from everyone. So I think we've reached the end. We have answered all of our questions. So we really appreciate you joining us and sharing information about Piccolo. And I thank all of our listeners who joined us today too. We've recorded this webinar, so you'll get an email tomorrow with this link. So feel free to share that with others in your program who you think might be interested. So thanks so much for joining us, and thank you, Lori.
You are welcome, and thanks to all of you for your attendance and your great questions.
Yeah, so have a great rest of the day, everyone.